The story begins in 1982 with a cosmonaut in a Soviet lunar module who is experiencing a malfunction. Several alarms beep incessantly, a viscous liquid leaks from a compartment, and the module ends up crashing in the Arctic Circle. Then we jump to the year 2015 in Alaska, where Professor Stephen is preparing for an academic trip with Sadie and Ronell, his students in the biology course. Stephen asks them to be careful with the budget and finds out that they took this very literally when the three arrive at the dock. Sadie arranged transportation for the expedition with her grandfather, Graf. He is the owner of the Harbinger boat, which he usually uses for crab fishing. The crew consists of 6 people, in addition to the captain, and now the trio of researchers. Doc is the doctor of the Harbinger, who has a habit of teasing a blonde Russian named Svet. The big guy is nicknamed Big G, and the others are Roland, Bo, and Atka. Sadie explains to them that the focus of the study is the impact of climate change on whale migration patterns. For that, they are tracking a group of belugas in the Bering Sea. Doc rudely interrupts the explanation to criticize government spending on useless research, and Ronell begins to retort, saying he probably doesn't even pay his taxes as he should. Captain Graf cuts off the discussion and reminds everyone that they are there to work. Since crab fishing usually occurs at night, Stephen can conduct the research with his students during the day without any problems. Big G takes the 2 girls to the old radio room, where they will be accommodated during the trip. Bo helps them with their luggage and becomes curious about the scientific equipment. Excited, Ronell shows him a device called a molecular analyzer, capable of extracting a series of data about a specific animal from a small sample. Sadie begins to show how the whale tracker works, but her grandfather's voice over the loudspeaker asks her to come to him. Graf asks if she is okay, and Sadie admits it's strange to be back, as she misses her parents a lot. Graf tells her not to let fear take over and encourages her to steer the helm, but Sadie says she is tired and needs to rest. A few hours later, the fishermen begin the arduous work while Sadie tries to sleep. Checking the tracker, she gets excited to see that there are several whales very close to the Harbinger and tries to wake Ronell, but she cannot. In the cabin next door, Stephen is also sleeping heavily and seems to have gotten sick the night before from the rocking of the boat, so she decides not to disturb him. Alone, she carries the equipment to the ideal spot to observe the belugas and starts the recording. Besides the whales, Sadie sees a strange red light flashing and beeping softly. She shows this to her grandfather and asks for his help investigating what it could be. When Stephen and Ronell wake up, a huge sphere is being hoisted out of the water. Sadie explains that it seemed to be attracting the whales, and Stephen gets irritated that she didn't wake him up. Svet and Roland start breaking the layer of ice that covers the sphere, while Ronell films Stephen talking about the discovery in a somewhat exaggerated and suspense-filled way. He becomes more and more excited about the mystery as blue ice layers appear, indicating that the sphere has been there for a long time. Sadie is the first to venture through the opening, and her grandfather soon joins her. He concludes that it is some sort of spacecraft of Soviet manufacture, and one of the passengers is still frozen inside. Upon realizing this, Graf says that the right thing to do is to hand the vehicle over to the authorities to be returned to the Russians. Stephen reacts with indignation and exclaims that it belongs to the university since the Soviet Union no longer exists. Graf accepts this argument, but reminds him that it was Sadie who found the module, so she is the owner now. The captain also says that the thing will stay in the hold until they return to port, and everyone is forbidden to touch it aboard the Harbinger. Stephen cannot accept this and tells Ronell to stop filming him, feeling demoralized. Later, Graf sees that an ice storm is approaching and decides to stop the boat to wait for the weather to improve. The fishermen continue working normally, and some of the tasks are carried out in the hold. Doc approaches the mysterious ship with great curiosity, and Bo takes the opportunity to scare him as a joke. While Graf tries to communicate what has happened to someone over the radio without success, Ronell also discovers that she is without signal on her cell phone, and Sadie explains that nothing will work during the storm. Still insisting on ownership of the lunar module, Stephen argues that the 2 students are there under his authority, and that, therefore, the discovery should be his. Bo gets irritated at seeing his threats to Sadie's academic future if she does not agree to recognize this. He asks Big G for help to distract Stephen, blocking his view with his size while Sadie sneaks away. She takes Svet to the hold to help her translate from Russian, and the 2 discover that it is a lunar module. When removing the cosmonaut's helmet, Sadie is surprised to see that he was not charred and begins to suspect that the cause of death has something to do with the bizarre appearance of his skin. By this point, Big G is already regretting going along with the scheme, as Steven won't stop talking. This gives enough time for Sadie to collect samples from the cosmonaut's body. Svet finds a word she doesn't know, something that could be translated as water bear, but Sadie brushes it off due to the rush. And she is right to hurry, as Big G ends up abandoning the ruse, and Steven realizes that he has no interest in his vast knowledge. Returning to the room, he sees Sadie talking to Bo in a whispered tone and waits until they close the door so he can listen in secretly. Sadie analyzes the samples and discovers the presence of thousands of tardigrades, a microscopic animal also called a water bear. Afraid of being left behind, Steven descends to the hold with his tablet and takes some pictures, disgusted at getting too close to the body. Svet challenges Big G to a drinking contest, which quickly devolves into a mix of fighting and flirting until he touches a scar on the side of her face, which seems to irritate her. Unbeknownst to anyone, something slithers through various parts of the boat until it reaches where Roland is sleeping. He wakes up suspiciously and peeks under the bed with a flashlight, finding a slimy mass pulsating and making bubbling noises. Roland barely has time to scream when the thing projects some of the slime in his direction, grabbing his face and pulling his entire body with such force that some parts are torn apart in the process. Up above, Sadie relays everything she has discovered so far to her grandfather, who becomes concerned about the possibility of a virus on board. She tries to calm him, saying that the tardigrades seem to be decomposing, but he is not very reassured to hear this and thinks it's better to turn back as soon as the storm passes. Inspecting the scar in the mirror, Svet pretends indifference when Ronell talks about Big G's obvious interest in her, but then asks for help with her makeup. At the same time, Graf is lamenting the lost crabs in the event of contamination when Steven arrives filled with threats. He says he will sue Sadie for having exposed everyone to a biological threat and shows that he has photos of the cosmonaut as proof. Sadie becomes afraid of the consequences and agrees to transfer all rights to the lunar module to Steven, much to her grandfather's dismay. When Svet says that it was a boyfriend who gave her that scar, Ronell expresses all her support and asks if the police found him. Svet replies that they did find him, but not all the parts. In the hold, Steven takes advantage of his advantage to order everyone around, telling them to organize his find and seal everything carefully. However, Graf shows that it is too late for that, as it appears that the cosmonaut has vanished. Steven accuses Sadie of having disposed of him out of spite, but she swears she knows nothing. Graf tightens the professor's neck against a pillar to convey that he disapproves of that talk with his granddaughter. Then the captain calls everyone for an emergency meeting. Big G smiles upon seeing Svet all dressed up, and Doc defends himself against the suspicions that he stole the cosmonaut as yet another of his pranks. Sadie is the only one who notices something wrong with Steven, who begins to sweat cold and suddenly backs away. She goes after him and finds him in the middle of the snowstorm, short of breath and feeling intense itching. Worried, she goes back inside and explains the situation to her grandfather. Then they all hear a terrible scream and run to assist, as the professor is completely out of control. They manage to carry him inside, but his entire body seems to be burning for no reason, and his skin begins to transform. To the horror of everyone, 3 structures emerge from his body in a disgusting eruption on his back. Steven screams and convulses until he finally succumbs. His body then begins to melt, flowing towards the drain at an abnormal speed. Before the last piece can do the same, Sadie traps it under a plastic cup for analysis. Bo sprays a little liquid nitrogen on it, causing it to freeze. Still very shaken, Sadie states that there is an organism aboard the Harbinger, and what happened to her professor may be a rare virus that liquefies the host. Otka has heard of something like this, popularly known as a sailor eater. Graf states that their safety is his responsibility and decides to return to the dock right now, despite the storm. The authorities will probably quarantine them, but the important thing is that they receive medication as soon as possible. Sadie warns that she will begin testing, and Graf asks Bo to stay with the nitrogen hose since it is their only weapon against the intruder. Under the microscope, the tardigrades begin to move again when warmed and demonstrate impressive abilities, such as changing to a solid state when they all come together. Big G and Graf go to call Roland so that he can start the boat's engine and find slime trails everywhere. Moreover, The transmission shaft, which is made of steel, seems to have been bent by an enormous force. Equally surprising is the report from the molecular analyzer about the sample, as it finds a vast variety of DNA. The students deduce that the tardigrades have developed the ability to modify the genetic composition of the host, in addition to their own. This means they can organize themselves to assume any form. Graf and Atka are still looking for Roland when they find the cosmonaut's body hanging from the ceiling and realize that a massive slimy creature is behind it. The monster attacks Atka immediately, and Graf cannot save him. Svet and Doc remain in the hold with Bo, who is still in charge of the hose, and Big G, frightened, is coming out with a bucket of nitrogen when Graf appears in panic. Everyone gathers again, and the captain delivers the bad news, including about the transmission shaft, meaning they have no way to leave. Sadie also explains her discoveries to everyone, warning that the creature must have gotten even bigger now that it absorbed Atka as well. Just as Svet asks Sadie if those things are intelligent, all the lights go out. The generator automatically turns on, but Big G warns that the battery will only last a few hours. As it becomes clear that this is not an enemy easily fought with a bucket, Bo teaches the others how to use the nitrogen hose. He also deduces that the creature must be in the engine room, as it could only have shut off the power from there. Deciding to initiate an attack, he takes one of the tanks with him and leads the group to the engine room, where he carefully opens the door. The place seems empty, but Sadie lights up a red puddle on the floor, and everyone begins to hear a disgusting suction sound. Following the trail, they find a gigantic organism that is currently chewing on someone's body. The monster shrieks and bares its teeth as it is attacked by the nitrogen jet. Graf warns Bo when it's time to take his finger off the trigger since the creature is now completely immobile. It is then that the two hear Ronell's screams asking for help with Svet. She has locked Doc in a cage because he was sweating, which made her suspect that he is infected. Now she wants to cut out the evil at the root and incinerate the cage with Doc still inside. In tears, he swears that he is only sweating because he is afraid of her, but Svet is not moved. Her friends are shocked by this attitude and join together to take the knife from her hand, but it is then that Sadie draws their attention to the cage. Doc is bent forward, and the same structures that appeared on Steven's back are now growing on him. Svet was right all along, and it is she who does the honors, frying the monster with a flare gun shot. Even so, Sadie remains suspicious and decides to check the Russian's bag, finding military communication devices. When confronted, Svet confesses that she is a spy and infiltrated the fishing boat with the aim of recovering the lunar module. She also reveals that the Soviets were trying to use the tardigrades to enhance their cosmonauts and make them immune to radiation. As everyone realizes, that experiment went very wrong, and now the Russians want to cover up the case. Ronell asks if she can use that equipment to warn her superiors that they can come pick up this thing, but Sadie has already deduced that this is not the plan. There is a submarine secretly following the Harbinger, and it will come to pick up Svet in 30 minutes. She will detonate the explosives she spread throughout the boat when she is far enough away, exterminating the organism along with the infected and witnesses. Big G is devastated by the betrayal and advances toward her, but she immediately draws a weapon. Sadie apologizes to her grandfather for asking him to pull that out of the water and asks what will happen to his wife, who has already gone through so much pain losing their son. Only now does Graf reveal that his wife passed away from cancer 3 months ago and that he has not had the courage to tell anyone or spread her ashes at sea. Everyone is under Svet's gun when Sadie notices the viscous liquid dripping from a pipe and signals to Bo. Graf also picks up on his granddaughter's idea and begins to talk to the Russian, doubting that there is really a submarine. As the organism grows, the group stands up and begins to threaten a collective attack, completely drawing Svet's attention. She suspects nothing until the moment the creature is already enormous and about to attack her. Ronell manages to grab the gun that falls on the ground, but it is precisely her that the monster chooses, swallowing her upper half before sucking the rest through the same pipe she entered. Big G finally lets out his rage and forces Svet to say where the explosives are. She tells him there are 2 in the engine room, but before she can reveal the location of the last one, the creature appears right next to her. Svet is attacked and brutally dragged off the boat. The group splits into pairs to search for the hidden bombs, with only 47 minutes left. Graf and Big G go to the engine room to remove the two from there, while Bo rummages through the boat for the other four. Not finding them, he begins to think that Svet tricked them, but Sadie has a hunch. She believes the bombs are in the hold, a narrow area too tight for any of the men. Graf allows her to go down to check, pleading for her to be careful, and she manages to find the remaining explosives. As she carefully removes the four, Bo discovers that all the crabs have disappeared and deduces that they were absorbed by the organism. He warns Sadie that the monster is much bigger than they had thought, and she then realizes that it is spread all around in the hold, right around her. To make matters worse, she drops the last bomb, letting it fall into the middle of the slime. With great concentration, she manages to recover it and moves very slowly to the hatch, being lifted by her grandfather just as the creature begins to become agitated. Just after Sadie leaves the hold, a tangle of tentacles bursts through the floor and goes to stick to the ceiling, visibly growing. Sadie places the explosives in the nitrogen tanks as that thing gradually forms a monster. She and Bo need to cover their ears when its shrill screams start. Big G helps the two out, and now there are just over 15 minutes left until the explosion. However, Sadie realizes that her grandfather is not well and discovers that he has been attacked by the organism. He tells everyone to stay away from him and won't let his granddaughter try to save him. After Graf moves away, a voice begins to speak in Russian over the radio. Sadie responds in English, yelling that she is still alive and telling the Russians to go to hell. In the captain's cabin, Graf presses the emergency button and grabs the urn with his wife's ashes. The other three watch from afar as he scatters them over the ice outside, trying to ignore the fierce roars coming from below. Graf asks Big G to try to straighten the shaft so they can get the boat out of there, and tells Bo to aim the hose at him if the transformation begins. Big G is working on the shaft when a humanoid blob emerges behind him that seems to have fused with the remains of Svet. The thing attacks him, but he fights back and manages to finish the repair before it can get up. Big G ends up being torn apart, and then the countdown reaches the end, and the nitrogen tanks explode. The only one who can pilot the boat now is Sadie, and Graf once again encourages her to conquer her fear of the helm. After she leaves, he asks Bo to freeze him quickly to end his suffering, but he takes too long to muster the courage, and a tentacle suddenly penetrates him from behind. From the helm, Sadie screams as she sees his body being thrown into the snow and rushes downstairs, where Graf is firing jets of nitrogen at the creature. He says she needs to freeze the boat, but it is only when she reaches the helm cabin that she understands what he meant. She steers the boat to collide with an iceberg and escapes through the window just as a glowing tentacle stretches in her direction. Falling in the snow, Sadie watches in horror as the monster rises again from the bowels of the boat, even larger this time. However, as the harbinger hits the iceberg, huge layers of ice break off and almost bury it. At the same time, the Coast Guard begins calling over the radio, and Sadie reports the sinking of the harbinger, identifying herself as the only survivor. They then inform her that the rescue helicopter is on its way, and Sadie awaits them stretched out on the ground, exhausted.